Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler, Season 1, Episode 33. Mu Chen also looked in front of him and could see 5 deep yellow pillars erected on the vast square. The stone pillars were filled with mysterious engravings. Around the stone pillars, there were traces of spiritual aura within the world fluctuating. This is a spirit convergence pillar, crafted by spirit convergence rocks, right? Mu Chen walked forward and looked at the 5 spirit convergence pillars. The rank 3 spirit convergence array within the Northern Spiritual Academy also had these things. However, the spirit convergence pillars at that place were shining gold. Its purity was also much higher than the 5 pillars in front of him. These 5 spirit convergence pillars are the central cores of the spirit convergence array. Every single one of them cost millions of spirit coins, Mu Feng said with a faint laugh. Mu Chen nodded. A spirit convergence array was different than ordinary spiritual arrays. Although it does not possess any offensive abilities, it is an essential item for many forces. Moreover, it is a symbol of strength for these forces. The reason why the Liu territory was able to become the strongest force within the Northern Spiritual Realm was because they possess a rank 2 spirit convergence array, aside from the fact that they were truly stronger than the others. In order to cultivate within a rank 2 spirit convergence array, many powerhouses would defect to the Liu territory in order to obtain better cultivation conditions, allowing themselves to go further on the path of cultivation. And generally speaking, a spirit convergence array could be considered a rather well-known spiritual array to people. Many spiritual array masters are aware of its diagram array. However, they are only aware of it. It was still extremely difficult if they want to construct it. Not to mention about the various rare materials that a spirit convergence array requires. The required number of spiritual seals in order to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array was a total of 50. Even rank 2 spiritual array masters, who were less skilled, may not create it alone. Moreover, they were extremely rare existences within the Northern Spiritual Realm. It was impossible for the Mu territory to invite them over. Thus, they could only use numbers and see if it could be completed by a joint force of 4 rank 1 spiritual array masters. Fortunately, Wen Ling had already been long regarded as a top existence among the rank 1 spiritual array masters and was highly likely to ascend to a rank 2 spiritual array master. With him leading, it would increase the chances significantly. To construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array this time, the 5 of us will each be responsible for 1 spirit convergence marble. We will base it on the diagram array, and each of us will be responsible for a portion of it. Then we will connect it together and cause the array to activate. Wenling looked at Mu Chen and said, although this method of being responsible for a portion of the diagram array is a way, it seems that it requires a high compatibility rate, right? If even the slightest mistake occurred during the connection process, it will probably... Mu Chen hesitated for a moment. He was not a rookie in spiritual arrays now and could naturally discover the flaw in this approach. Wenling nodded and sighed. It can't be helped. I think that it's impossible to find such an amazing rank 2 spiritual array master within the entire Northern Spiritual Realm who could construct a rank 2 spirit convergence array by himself. When the Liu territory constructed their rank 2 spirit convergence array, they also used this approach. And based on my knowledge, they secretly failed many times and suffered a huge loss. However, normal individuals did not know this. Mu Feng smiled and said, the materials that we gathered could only support 1 more failure. Otherwise, we will have to spend some time to prepare it again. If we were to fail to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array, the Liu territory will probably not give up on this chance of attacking us. They will spread it out loudly, and that will be detrimental to us, Zhou Ye said helplessly. Mu Feng waved his hand and smiled as if he did not care. It's fine if you do your best. Zhou Ye let out a bitter laugh. He knew that Mu Feng did not want to give too much pressure and responsibility to Mu Chen, since Mu Chen had gotten involved with it. This is why he acted so carefree. But in fact, Mu Feng really hoped to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array. This way, it would reap great benefits to the Mu territory's fame. Mu Chen glanced at Mu Feng and did not say anything. After all, they were father and son. Although Mu Feng might be saying this, he could tell how important this matter was to him. To arrange the array this time, I will be responsible for 20 spiritual seals. As for the remaining 30, Chen Ling and the others will each be responsible for 8. As for Mu Chen, he will be responsible for 6 spiritual seals. Wen Ling looked at Mu Chen and said, Do not underestimate these 6 spiritual seals. If you want to complete this portion of the diagram array, it will probably be even harder than the spiritual flame array. Mu Chen nodded. Naturally, he understood this truth. Furthermore, he did not have much experience, so Wenling had already thought highly of him when he allowed him to be responsible for 6 spiritual seals. Next up, I will explain the key parts of the spirit convergence array. You must carefully remember it, so that you will not make a mistake and ruin everything, Wenling said strictly. Yes, Mu Chen gave a slight smile and said. Although the boy's handsome face was quite young, he was still humble and polite. This made the other 3 rank 1 spiritual array masters watching by the side nod their heads. It was rare for this Mu territory's little lord to act so harmonious even with his status and talent. If it was another youth, they would have acted arrogant and butted in already. Mu Feng watched and seriously listened as Wenling explained the key points about the spirit convergence array to Mu Chen. He also smiled pleasantly and waved his hand before heading away with Zhou Yi. It was a headache to listen about this and that about spiritual arrays. It was still best to leave that boy to deal with it by himself. In the next few days, Mu Chen would head to this square and study with Wenling regarding this rank 2 spirit convergence array. Moreover, with his gentleness and studious attitude, the other 3 rank 1 spiritual array masters were quite satisfied with it. They would also talk about their experiences in arranging spiritual arrays, and Mu Chen would humbly learn from it. By working hard, Mu Chen had basically understood the rank 2 spirit convergence array after a few days. At the same time, he was surprised about how complex the spirit convergence array was. Compared to it, the spiritual flame array that he had learned earlier was nothing much. Moreover, Wenling and the others were quite satisfied after seeing Mu Chen beginning to understand about this rank 2 spirit convergence array. They discussed it for a while and finally decided to take action tomorrow. Mu Chen stood in the square. He stared at the 5 spirit convergence pillars standing upright and took a deep breath. He gradually allowed himself to calm down. Beside him, Mu Feng patted his shoulders and said with a comforting smile, "Just do your best. It doesn't matter if it fails. After all, it will only just be delayed for a while." Mu Chen smiled, but he did not reply. He looked at Wenling and saw the latter's face becoming extremely serious. Then he immediately waved and moved on top of a spirit convergence pillar. Seeing this, Mu Chen and the others also moved, and each of them landed on top of a spirit convergence pillar. "Prepare yourself," Wenling shouted and shook his hands. Then a clump of light floated out from his hand, and a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation emitted out wave after wave. Mu Chen and the others also followed. 4 clumps of light rose to the sky. These were all high-ranked spiritual beasts' soul essence. In order to construct this sort of array, spiritual beasts' soul essence is an indispensable item. This is because the array requires the massive energy that is accumulated within the soul essence as a guide. "Let's begin!" Wenling stared at the clumps of light overhead and let out a shout. He waved his sleeves and 20 spiritual seals surged out from his sleeves in an instant. This speed of condensing spiritual seals had, indeed, surpassed ordinary rank 1 spiritual array masters. Chen Ling and the other 2 rank 1 spiritual array masters all stared enviously at this. Although they were considered rank 1 spiritual array masters, they were far worse than Wenling. The latter could highly likely become a rank 2 spiritual array master. They were jealous for a moment. Then they collected their thoughts and each of them condensed 8 spiritual seals. They carefully controlled it and allowed them to enter the air surrounding the spiritual beast's soul essence above them. Buzz. Mu Chen also took action now, and 6 spiritual seals condensed on his fingertips. With his ability right now, he would be able to manipulate it sophisticatedly if he was only manipulating 6 spiritual seals. The 6 spiritual seals vanished within the surroundings of the spiritual beast's soul essence. Then the air trembled. Mu Chen closed his eyes slightly and moved his long fingers. As his fingertips trembled, a light emerged within the surrounding air of the spiritual beast's soul essence. Light beams carefully extended out and intertwined with each other. The square was completely silent. The 5 of them were gathering all their thoughts and carefully arranged the portion of the diagram array they were responsible for. Mu Feng and the others stood nearby and had a serious expression as they stared at the fluctuations caused by the spiritual energy. A hint of nervousness flashed through their eyes. If they were to fail this time, this plan of theirs would be delayed for at least 6 months. Moreover, they would definitely be ridiculed by the Lu territory. "Pass down an order. Do not let anyone approach this location." Mufeng waved his hand and gently spoke. Yes. A guard hurriedly responded and spread out with a large amount of men. The time quickly passed while Mufeng and the others were waiting restlessly. In a blink of an eye, an hour passed. The spiritual energy fluctuations at the scene were becoming increasingly violent. Above the 5 individuals and the spirit convergence pillars, a complex spiritual energy diagram array was flashing dazzlingly. Another half an hour quickly passed. Wenling was the first to open his eyes. His eyes were filled with nervousness and seriousness. This time, he assumed half the responsibility of arranging the spiritual array. If others were to make a mistake, they might be able to save it. However, if he were to cause it, it would basically mean that the arrangement of the array would end up in complete failure. Following after Wenling, Chen Ling and the others also opened their eyes one after another. It was evident that they had completely the portion of the diagram array they were responsible for. Connect the array. Seeing this, Wenling's face became increasingly serious. Next up, it was the most difficult step. If any mistakes were to occur during the connection process, it was likely to affect the situation as a whole and force the entire group to collapse. The 4 of them heard this and tensed up their bodies. They gathered all their focus and moved their thoughts. Then, light beams shot out from the complex light array above them and began to intertwine with each other. At the outside, Mufeng and the others' hearts pounced when they witnessed this scene. They knew that whether or not it would succeed would all depend on this step. A violent and dense spiritual energy trembled within the air like a wave. Everybody outside was staring nervously at the sky. At that location, 5 parts of the complex spiritual energy light array were beginning to gather slowly above Wenling and the others' heads. Swoosh! At this moment, the 5 complex light arrays were rapidly trembling. Then a spiritual energy light beam exploded out and suddenly made contact with each other in the center point of the array. The light beams intertwined with each other complicatedly and bursts of fluctuations emitted out. Wenling and the others' faces were extremely serious. They did not dare to be distracted. At this moment, if even a single mistake were to occur, when the light beams intertwined with each other, it would lead to serious consequences. The light beams quietly connected with each other. Then Mufeng and the others were able to see that the 5 separated spiritual energy light array were showing faint signs of merging together. However, they still didn't dare to breathe out. This is because they knew that it was not completely successful yet. The time passed by slowly and the trajectories of the connected light beams also became more complicated. This requires a rather precise control. When 2 spiritual energy light beams made contact with each other, they must control the power of the spiritual energy to the same level. Otherwise, it is highly possible that one side's light beam would be shattered by the other, and thus the connection would fail. It truly requires sophisticated and subtle control ability. As the connection became increasingly complex, Wenling and the others' eyes became more serious. Even cold sweat emerged on their forehead. This sort of control had a considerable consumption on their mind. Muchen focused his mind. His eyes suddenly closed, yet Wenling and the others did not notice it. Although the sight in front of him was complete darkness, it was strange that his mind seemed to have flowed through the spiritual energy light beams that he controlled and wandered within the spirit convergence array like a flood. Not only was it the part he was responsible for, even Wenling and the others' parts were reflected within his heart. At this moment, the other worlds seemed to have been separated by him. No movement could disturb him. There were only sketched out complex and obscure diagram array trails within his heart. Under this somewhat strange state, the nervousness that Mu Chen had originally felt faded away. His long fingers trembled slightly, and the spiritual energy light beam moved precisely based on his thoughts. At this moment, he felt increasingly that he had an innate sense of proficiency over the spiritual array. In midair, the 5 diagram arrays were getting closer. The spiritual energy light beams converged together, and gradual signs of it completely merging had appeared. When Mufeng and the others witnessed this scene, they could not hold back the delight surging out from their faces. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Wenling did not relax. He understood that it was not considered successful as long as the final step of the connection process was not complete. That is because this tiny step could cause the entire array to collapse. There's only the final bit left. Wenling gritted his teeth and attempted to calm himself down. He continued to manipulate the spiritual energy light beams stably and allowed it to connect with the other 4 portions of the diagram array. And when he completed this final step, he could not help but let out a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, he felt a strange fluctuation coming out from the spiritual array. This fluctuation was not strong, yet it instantly changed the color of Wenling's face. He hurriedly lifted his head and noticed that traces of disorder had actually appeared in the spiritual array in front of Chenling. Shit! Wenling's heart jumped and his face became pale. It turned out that when Chenling was connecting the spiritual array with the spiritual array master to the left of him, the latter's spiritual energy light beam was slightly stronger. It actually caused his spiritual energy light beam to shatter. Upon seeing this, Chenling's face changed. He quickly attempted to save it and hastily converged light beams to reconnect them. However, he made a mistake while he was in a rush and instead caused the originally stabilized spiritual array to tremble. Kacha! A sudden sound of breaking emerged from a part of the spiritual array formed by Chenling. Then he stared with a pale face as the spiritual energy light beams were disappearing bit by bit. Finally, it affected the spiritual seals and caused 3 of the spiritual seals to completely shatter. This sudden turn of events made the other 2 spiritual array masters' face change, especially the one whose spiritual energy was too strong and caused Chenling's spiritual energy light beam to fade away. His face was exceptionally ugly. Once a spiritual seal was destroyed, it basically meant that half the spiritual array was destroyed. Moreover, it was impossible to complete the spirit convergence array without Chenling's disappeared portion of the spiritual array. This accident was immediately perceived by Mu Feng and Zhou Yi. Their hands gripped together on the spot as they stared at the disorderly spiritual array in front of Chenling. They glanced over and noticed a hint of bitterness from the other person's eyes. Indeed, a problem had appeared. Chenling, stabilize your mind. Do not get confused. Wenling shouted out lugly. Chenling gritted his teeth and took a couple of deep breaths. He quickly used all his power to stabilize the spiritual array. However, after the 3 spiritual seals shattered, his spiritual array could be considered as incomplete. Brother Wen, I'm afraid that I cannot maintain it for long. Sorry, I've dragged you down this time, Chenling said with a bitter smile. You only have 3 spiritual seals that were shattered, so the spiritual array is only slightly incomplete. Can you form more spiritual seals to save it now? Wenling gritted his teeth and asked. Chenling's face reddened up, and he said ashamedly, I probably cannot stabilize this incomplete spiritual array as I continue to form spiritual seals. Wenling sighed. Then he turned to look at the other 2 spiritual array masters. They too shook their heads embarrassedly. If they were to distract themselves to help save Chenling's portion, problems would probably appear on their side. Seeing this, Wenling let out a bitter expression. He had already took the responsibility of completing the most complex portion during this joint array arrangement. Right now, manipulating 20 spiritual seals was already hit limit. It was impossible for him to create any more. Hey, he sighed and shook his head helplessly at Mufeng. It seems that they failed this time as well. Mufeng let out a bitter laugh and nodded his head, but just when he was about to wave his hand to allow them to stop, However, when he intended to end this time's array arrangement, Joya suddenly said aloud, Little Mu, Mufeng hurriedly lifted his head when he heard this. He noticed that Mu Qin had his eyes closed tightly and did not seem to have noticed the situation occurring right now. However, 3 spiritual seals suddenly appeared on his fingertips. What is he doing? Wenling and the others also became aware of Mu Qin's action and were stunned. However, their color of their faces instantly changed as they noticed Mu Qin flicking the 3 spiritual seals over, and it landed above Chenling. These 3 spiritual seals quickly fused into the air. Then Wenling and the others were able to see spiritual energy light beams rapidly extending out, and the incomplete portion of the spiritual array were being drawn out. It's the shattered portion of Chenling's spiritual array. Wenling and the others had a keen vision over the others. They instantly saw that the portion of the spiritual array that Mu Qin had drawn out was Chenling's shattered portion of the spiritual array. However, they were immediately astounded. How was this possible? Mu Qin had always been studying about the spiritual array portion that he was responsible for. Moreover, he had never made contact with the Chenling's portion. How could he form out the missing portion this quickly and without any mistakes? Wenling exchanged glances with each other and saw the surprise within each other's eyes. Then they discovered that Mu Qin had kept his eyes shut the entire time. In other words, he did not need to see it at all, and he formed the shattered portion out. How could this be possible? The other two spiritual array masters were speechless. Wenling was also surprised. He fixed his sight at Mu Chen, who had his eyes closed while his fingers trembled. Then his eyes focused and he slowly said, "He seems to have entered the state of heart array." Heart array state? Chenling and the others hesitated for a moment before gasping. Their eyes were filled with an incredulous expression. Isn't the heart array state only possible for spiritual array masters who are at least rank 3? How could he enter such a state? Wenling also felt incredulous, yet he only said with a bitter smile, "I am not too sure as well." He seemed to possess great talent within the areas of spiritual arrays. Although this situation is rare, it has appeared before. A few highly gifted individuals would be able to rely on a certain catalyst to enter this state before reaching rank 3 spiritual array master. Chenling and the others were completely speechless. Soon they were filled with envy. They would probably never enter this state within their lifetime. However, the boy in front of them seemed to have entered it inadvertently. It really made them sigh deep down within their hearts. Chenling, control the rest of your spiritual array to connect it with Mu Chen's. Then, continue to combine the array, Wenling said in a deep voice. Hearing this, Chenling nodded. He carefully controlled the incomplete spiritual array and slowly connected it to the part that Mu Chen had saved. Combine the array! Hearing Wenling shout, Chenling and the others urged the spiritual arrays to connect once again. This time, no accidents occurred, and the 5 spiritual arrays merged together perfectly. All of a sudden, a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation burst out from midair. A large brilliance enshrouded the light barrier, and everybody within the Mu territory could feel that the spiritual aura within the world was gathering in the direction of the square. Success! Wenling and the others stared at the complex spiritual array that enveloped the sky above the square. A sense of relief and delight poured out from their eyes. Outside of the venue, Mu Feng also had an excited expression as he saw that the situation took a dramatic turn. Gradually, Wenling and the others detached their thoughts away from the spirit convergence array and stared complicatedly at the boy nearby. At this moment, the boy gradually opened his eyes. He looked at Wenling and the others as he scratched his head. With a slightly dazed voice, he said, "We finished it?" Hearing this, Wenling and the others' faces completely stiffened. That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.